Hello, welcome back to my channel. This is Madrona's Pulse Teachings and I am Iris, and I'm going to chat with you about the upcoming Taurus Full Moon, and she's a mighty one, folks. I'm sending out lots of love. I know that a lot of people are in it right now, and this is a big month to say the least. So let's just recap a little bit. So we started out with our Scorpio new moon on November 1st, and that was really significant because we had Mars opposite Pluto. Mars was at the final degree of Cancer then. Pluto is at the final degree of Capricorn, where it still sits for this full moon. And then Mars continued to move into Leo. And so by the time that we get to this full moon, we are out of the intensity of that opposition between Mars and Pluto, which is nice. That said, we're going to return to that opposition. That story is not over. That story is very much in process. And it really, that new moon moving into November is really just leading us into this full moon. And we have a full moon conjunct Uranus. We also have this full moon happening on the day that Saturn stations direct, and it is also happening 4 days before Pluto enters Aquarius. So this is really a moment. This full moon is happening as Pluto is just, it's just about to enter Aquarius. I mean, it's almost paused in this suspension of that final breath. And then we move into Aquarius. And there's a lot going on with this full moon, and there's a lot happening in November. And I think one of the most important things to remember during this time is that what is happening now is part of something so much bigger. And this is signaled by the full moon because all of the outer planets are talking with this full moon, because they are all talking with each other. And we are in this cosmic moment when the outer planets are talking with each other. And when that happens, it signals that there is really a shift of consciousness happening. And let's just be clear, folks, especially in the collective, a shift of consciousness is a messy, messy time. Okay, it sounds lovely when we get our kind of scrolling through, Instagram posts or little spiritual TikTok videos, and someone's just sitting and it's beautiful and there's the bright white light and it's a shift of consciousness. And sure, those moments happen, and life on this plane keeps playing out, and it's messy. This is why, I always like to say that, like, when we're talking about awakening, Uranian archetype, this full moon, awakening is messy. It has these moments of insight, and they're incredible. And then it takes a lot of work to keep moving and shifting and integrating. And we are always on these ongoing journeys of integrating and moving along what is a non-linear path. And we are in a big moment of that non-linear path right now. And so if you are feeling overwhelmed, if you are also feeling grief, and Pluto is moving signs and it is leaving the final degree of Capricorn, and that final degree of Capricorn can hold quite a bit of grief, as well as Pluto is grief. It's part of the Plutonic archetype. It's part of how we transform, how we move from one state of consciousness to another, how we feel the desire as a soul unconsciously driven to evolve comes from part of our grief patternings and experiences, especially on soul levels. That's Romeo. And that's all part of Pluto. And so as Pluto's moving signs, that's going to be activated. Okay. And so if we are feeling some of that, knowing that we're in process and it is shifting. And literally, when we look at the conversations that are happening during this full moon and as we move through the rest of November, we really see that he's just never done this before. Like, this is not a typical Romeo thing. He's just bringing y'all a message about moving through grief, apparently, and smelling pine cones, because I'm pretty sure that's what he was doing. Okay, I am sorry if you are new to my channel. I often introduce new folks to my channel because there's usually animal interruptions, whether I am here in my little urban rhythms with my new sidekick Romeo for the bit, or back in my rural rhythms where there's always animals interrupting. Okay, so all of that to say, we are moving through a shift, and it is a massive shift. And so trying not to get too focused on one story and coming into realizing that things are changing. Okay, because Pluto at the final degree of Capricorn is literally, I mean, Pluto switching signs is literally tectonic plate shifting, but this happening at the final degree of Capricorn is that final shift of the tectonic plates of psyche. And now we have a full moon conjunct Uranus to like send us into it, to send us into Pluto and Aquarius, okay? And Uranus is the ruler of Aquarius. So the themes emerge. So let's start with the basics of the full moon. We have got the sun, who is in Scorpio at 24 degrees of Scorpio, opposite the moon at 24. It's 24 exact of Taurus. And then Uranus is at 25 degrees. Okay. So we've got Uranus conjunct the moon opposite the sun. And that right there, okay, so we're in the Scorpio-Taurus axis. The full moon, you know, in the sign of the moon is usually where we say that in this lunar cycle, something is being illuminated for our consciousness. So this is happening in Taurus, but it's not just Taurus, it's Taurus conjunct a Uranus retrograde, who is really working on our Taurus realms, awakening. Okay, so Taurus brings us into body consciousness, into earth consciousness. It also brings us into pleasure through the body. I mean, we can also think about radical pleasure emerging, radical embodiment emerging. Uranus's journey through Taurus is absolutely also about, you know, awakening us to sustainable lives for ourselves that also tie into the collective and absolutely tie into listening to Earth through our own Earth consciousness that comes through the body. And Uranus there at this full moon, before Pluto enters Aquarius, is a radical awakening of that consciousness for those of us that are willing to open to it. And again, those openings are not always simple, and they can be messy journeys. And Uranus, they can also change things. You know, that's what happens is when we suddenly have that kind of radical embodied awakening, we might realize that our life needs to shift directions. We might realize that there's ways of being in community, that there's ways of being aligned to higher self, which is also part of Uranus, that want to come through. And if those insights are coming during this full moon, we want to honor them. We want to journal them down. We want to look at them every day because they might be speaking to themes that we need to become aware of with Pluto and Aquarius. I'm going to make a video in the next little while on Pluto and Aquarius themes that we're going to be merging with. But with this full moon conjunct the ruler of Aquarius, and so especially the insights that are coming through that kind of awakened body earth consciousness, which is truly about what we can be and do as humans here. We want to pay attention to that because it grounds us into that awakened consciousness. And part of moving with Pluto through Aquarius is going to be a struggle to stay grounded, is going to be a struggle not to get carried off into ideas and planes of the intellect that disconnect from everything else that is. And so Uranus being in Taurus, as this shift happens, giving us this full moon illumination, we want to pay attention to our own lives. What wants to ground us? What radical breakthroughs are coming up in our consciousness right now, but coming up through the body, coming up through awareness? So When I say, awareness through the body, this literally is a practice of learning to listen to our body speaking with us. Our body has a type of a consciousness. This is what the philosophy of embodiment is all about. Once I made a video about embodiment, and someone said, I really wish you wouldn't use new age words, which I'm not even going to comment on. But embodiment is not a new practice. It is like, yes, it's come into the social pop culture and it's a word that gets used a lot, but the philosophical tradition of embodiment, it comes out of the Western philosophy of phenomenology. If we're looking at kind of the philosophical roots, which is several hundred years, but that itself we can trace back into medieval and ancient philosophy, especially when we look at oral traditions of what traditionally in the West has been more kind of women. I have a colleague that works with women in the margins, and that can be some of the language around this type of embodied wisdom that comes from our connection to earth. It is old and it is rooted, and of course there are many indigenous cultures and wisdom traditions that work with embodiment as that kind of relational way of knowing with our connection to earth. And this is what Taurus really takes us into, and how the senses and working with the senses and allowing us, yes, to feel pleasure through the senses can be part of tuning in to that earth consciousness. And so that, in listening to the body, and then the body speaks, it's like if even thinking about going somewhere and we're getting nauseous or we're getting that clenching in the throat, though, that is the body literally speaking. And we can open up and dialogue with ourselves and see what messages come out. And there's so many practices for this. But I'm going into this because this is all part of radical embodiment. And this full moon is taking us into these places of understanding through these other ways of knowing. And of course, that energy is opposite our sun in Scorpio. And it's still Scorpio season. And Scorpio season wants to dig down deep into our psyches, into our emotions, into our intimate relationships, into our fears of intimate relationships, into our fears of merging. And it wants to discover what's there, and it wants to transform it so that we can evolve and we can move into even deeper realms of intimacy and really truth making. Okay, so it's ironic because Scorpio is a sign that can take us into such deep truth making, and yet it often gets kind of talked about in pop astrology as mysterious and deceitful. That is part of a Scorpio that is acting out of pure fear if it's going into those places. Okay, so when Scorpio is especially responding, that sun responding with a radical embodiment, whatever's coming up there wants to also give us information about our deepest intimacies. Now, this is with other people, it is also with ourselves, and it is also with life. So right there, like we're just talking about the sun and the moon conjunct Uranus. There's a lot there. Also just, Uranus is traditionally a wild card energy, and it is unpredictable. And whatever Uranus brings up, however, Uranus has one archetypal drive above all else, and that is to awaken. It is to awaken. And it usually does that by breaking with mainstream, by breaking with status quo, by helping us to evolve as individuals on our own journeys, and archetypally, Uranus teaches us about how that evolution of our own journey is connected to the evolution of the collective. And so Uranus also brings up how our own role, we have a role to play with the collective. And that's why our communities become really important. And so everything that I've just been talking about, paying attention to the themes that come up, there's also a lot more going on with this full moon. So there's also a lovely trine, an earth trine with that moon and Uranus to Ceres, our earth mother, who has been working with us, steadying us as we go, always reminding us that she's moving through Capricorn, that there is this sacred drumbeat that carries the sacred rhythm of the sacred wisdom, and she is there and she is trying that Uranus. So especially knowing that if wildcard energy is coming up more than you've already been given a dose of in November, rooting into what is nurturing, what could be nurturing about what's shifting. Also, what is nurturing about, how can you bring nurture to yourself? Maybe you imagine using that Uranus energy, how the future could look, right? And especially if you are not feeling positive about the future right now, all the more reason to do your work of cultivating hope through what will nurture. And there might be something around community there, because Uranus is conjunct this full moon, and that wants us to come into our it's where we want to find our pod. It's where we want to find like-minded individuals who are committed to some of the same ideals and the evolutionary intents of ourselves. And so are there communities that you can kind of set intentions for, that you can join, that might be part of nurturing yourself during this time, that will help you to come into your embodied higher self in this plane? And of course, that full moon conjunct Uranus is also trining Pluto at the final degree of Capricorn, okay? And it is sextiling Neptune, okay? And then the sun is sextiling Pluto, and it is trining Neptune, who's at 27 degrees of Pisces. So we've got the sun in a trine to that Pisces. So we've got that water trine. And then we've got this trine between Uranus and the full moon with Ceres, the Earth Mother, who is at 22 degrees at Capricorn. And then Pluto at that final breath, exhale of Capricorn. And that's also a lot. Okay, it's also a lot. It's a lot of energy. All the more reason why we want to lean into what grounds us. Just the fact that Uranus is in play, that is a lot for the nervous system. So the grounding exercises and practices that you have coming up to, on the day of, and moving through the full moon are really, really important. And also doing those grounding practices, whether it is traditional meditation, going for your walks, doing your journaling, dancing to whatever music helps ground you, really paying attention to any insights that come then, because of course Uranus is energy that can kind of bring what we consider downloads of higher mind self. And so during this time, just paying attention to what is emerging for you, and again listening to it coming through the body. We also have two things I absolutely also want to talk about. So Venus. We have to see what's up with Venus, because this is a Taurus full moon, and we always want to look at the ruler of that sign. And the ruler of that sign is Venus. Venus is in Capricorn. So she is just before 5 degrees of Capricorn. She's at 4 degrees and 54 minutes. And she is squaring the nodes. We're at 5 degrees. The true nodes are at 5 degrees of North Node in Aries and the South Node in Libra. So we have this added layer, firstly, of a Venus in Capricorn. Venus in Capricorn is a particular Venus. She's dedicated. She is dedicated to her goals. Venus in Capricorn, however, is a happy Venus when she is dedicated to the goals that align with her values. Not the values of society, not the values of family, not the values of mainstream anything, unless those values also align with your core values. And so the fact that Venus is in Capricorn, Earth, that Earth energy, during this full moon, we have this strong resonance of Earth energy, and there's a heightened pull to really do a little bit of inner reflection of our values right now, in this moment, in this November, not where we were at the new moon, because we've journeyed through quite a lot. What values are most important to you now? And those are heightened. That kind of examination is heightened because she's squaring the nodes. And so in a transit with the square of the nodes, this is really also potentially opening to opportunity of, there might be one-on-one relationships that are going to shift. Some might kind of fall away into lesser forms. Some might become even stronger, so that you can be with one-on-one people that help you realize your goals, that help you actualize your goals. Goals for yourself, goals for how you want to set the structures of your life, how you want to build the structures of your life to take you forward. This is part of Capricorn. And of course, that North Node in Aries, these want to be values that are part of that primal self moving forward, okay, in a new way. Venus square the nodes right now says that there's a new layer coming as we're having a Taurus full moon conjunct Uranus awakening us to higher values, okay? So there's strong emphasis on being aware and being really honest. Venus in Capricorn wants to be honest about her values, and she wants to really not spend time, unless she finds a way to make spending time with someone whose values are misaligned with one's own meaningful, which might be out of love or compassion or care, of course, all of that. Then that becomes a way of aligning our values to spending that time. But she doesn't really want to be spending time where she feels like she's betraying herself. And Capricorn, that gets Venus kind of, it gets her quite depressed. Okay, so you really want to ensure that you're working on your values, because that is the energy that's kind of overseeing some of this full moon energy. And last but certainly not least, this is going to be a little longer one because there's a lot, is this incredible conversation that's happening during the full moon between Mercury, Jupiter, and Saturn. So as if it wasn't enough that we have the sun and the moon conjunct Uranus, and then we have the outer planets all talking from within there, we also have a Mercury who's at 16 degrees of Sagittarius, opposite our Jupiter retrograde, who's at 19 degrees. And they are square Saturn, who is stationed direct already by the time that we come into this full moon. So Saturn stationed direct at 9:21 a.m. Eastern time. Okay, and our full moon is at 4:27 p.m. So Saturn stations direct. And Saturn is in a tighter square to that Mercury, but Mercury is opposite Jupiter. And, there's a lot here. This Saturn stationing direct, Saturn is helping us to create new alignments within ourselves, in our lives, so that we can get so much more real about a spiritual path. Okay? That's kind of the core archetypal of Saturn in Pisces, so that we can kind of work on realigning ourselves from the inside out to set us up for 2025 and 2026 as Saturn and Neptune move into Aries. And so Saturn stationing direct is really significant because those alignments, we've been working with those realignments, and now it's time to move forward because we've been doing a lot of clearing. And yet that's happening as Saturn is squaring Mercury and Jupiter, and Saturn square with Jupiter is part of a longer story. Okay. We're going to have 3 squares altogether. We had our first square of Saturn and Jupiter in August. Now we have the second one beginning now. It is going to be exact at towards just after solstice in December. And then we'll have a third next year in June. In June 2025. And so there's something that altogether is new about the structures of our life, about the way that we can seek integration in our life, and that we can really create these, groundedness in our own authority, in our own self-confidence, in our own kind of reliance on our inner structures in order to help us go out into the world, in order to help us expand. And that Jupiter-Saturn conversation is still in process, okay? And it is part of this kind of ongoing first stage square, meaning that we're really in process of creating something new, and potentially a big way. And that potentially in a big way, that something new is coming up again, and we're getting a look at it, and we're going to keep getting a look at it. It's going into 2025. But Mercury is going to station retrograde, and Mercury is opposite Jupiter, and Jupiter is retrograde, and Mercury is in Sagittarius, and it's the ruler of that Gemini Jupiter. So there could be a bit of start and stop. There could be a bit of also just forward thinking. I mean, that Saturn is going, but it also is showing us that there's things that we haven't figured out yet. We don't have the pieces. We don't know where they all go. We don't even have all of the pieces yet. So we want to keep an inspired vision of where we're heading, and also allow for new information to keep emerging, because Mercury is going to station retrograde on November 25th, and it's going to go back through Sagittarius. Okay. And that Mercury going back through Sagittarius suggests that, you know, literally there's a worldview that we don't completely understand yet. And therefore, it's also really important not to get too attached to the ever-shifting worldview of the collectives that are emerging in our place within it, and to keep a healthy distance, because we don't have all the pieces, and we don't totally understand how all those pieces fit together in the moving mosaic that they are in the process of forming. And that is in really our own lives, in our own understanding, and then in our immediate communities and surroundings. And that is one layer. And then we go to that full moon where we have all the outer planets talking to each other, where we have Pluto about to enter into Aquarius. And there's a lot of moving pieces of other dimensions and realms that we definitely don't have yet. And we are on massive journeys. And there's so much that will change. And there's so much that we're moving through. And we're also shedding so much. And all the more reason to move gently. If the moments come when you kind of have that opening or that vision, and you have the spirit to move quickly, then you work with that. But if you're feeling heaviness, if you're feeling grief, if you're feeling tired, really applying self-care and love and reaching out to wherever your kind of safe place to go is, whether that is animal companion, human companions, nature companions, book of poetry companions, whatever it is, but really leaning in and also inviting change, because we have got a Uranus full moon, and change is part of the game with Uranus. And remembering that change, when Uranus is involved, is about awakening. And there's a lot of different ways to receive knowledge and meaning on these human journeys. And we don't get taught about a lot of them. We just get kind of boxed into a very linear, cognitively driven idea of reductive understanding. And Uranus blasts through that. And so just remembering to kind of really lean in to those meditation, to the practices that bring us there, journaling, synchronicities, that's part of Uranus. And I'm going to leave it there. Okay, folks, I'm sending lots and lots of full moon love and blessings, and I will see you soon. Be well.